I have the pleasure of introducing Ileana Ruelas. Grew up in Mā'ili near Tumbleland and the Pig Store. She and her brother Huliko'a Ruelas were raised by a single mom, David Ruelas, her great-grandmother Helen Wong, and her grandparents David Makali'i Wong and Grace Wong. Her great-grandparents ran the old movie theater on Hili'ikipi Street and founded the Mā'ili Sands Canoe Club. Her great-grandfather John was known for his strong relationship with the land and often grew many fruits and vegetables to eat and flowers to make lace. Her grandfather David had 11 brothers and sisters, and each were taught to sing and play different musical instruments. So oftentimes the house she grew up in hosted backyard jam sessions and was full of storytelling. She was influenced by the elders that surrounded her, music, storytelling, and the relationships that wove these seamlessly together. So in her work, she also weaves stories and the wisdom of families into what she does. She earned her Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts in Sociology, and her academic work focused on how to create social change through policy, programs, and movements. Her thesis analyzes the history of relationships to ʻāina at Makua in Wai'anae and explores cycles of community advocacy through storytelling, media representation, and legal framing. She currently serves as a community outreach coordinator for Native Hawaiian Student Services within the School of Hawaiian Knowledge, and I have the pleasure of introducing Ileana.
Thank you. Oh wow. Did you make these? No. Oh, cool. Not me. Aloha, everybody. I need a paper because I can't wing it like Kalani. But wasn't he so much fun? Yes. Before I begin, I wanted to ask if a few people in the audience wouldn't mind standing up. If they're still here. Is Maile Shimabukuro still here? Is Fred Dodge in the back? Oh, there he is. and then, oh, okay. Miley's with her son. And then my mom and my grandma right here in the front. I look like them, except for I'm a little bit younger. So I wanted to honor these folks because they were very integral pieces in helping me through this process. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey, but before I do, I wanted to aloha them a little. Ke kau aloha wale mai la kauae, ka mauna o kali ukua. Iku aloha me ka mahalo, aloha, aloha e. Ke kau aloha wale mai la kauae, ka mauna o kali ukua. Iku aloha me ka mahalo, aloha, aloha e. So really, I just want to honor that. Fred Dodge and the folks that I interviewed, they are a mountain of knowledge. And so what I am presenting is but a piece of sand, a grain of sand from what they had to share. I didn't realize that it would be so small, so I'm really wordy. So I'm going to kind of break it down a little bit. What I wrote about was Makua Valley. If you look up in the dictionary, one of the coolest things about Hawaiian language is almost every single word has between 4 and 15 meanings, depending on how you spell them, at minimum, yeah. And what's also really neat is almost every single word has to do with relationship to ʻāina, one of them. One of them has to do with procreation of children, usually. One of them has to do with a practice. If you look at that, if you play this game, there's actually a Hawaiian language dictionary online. So you can play this game and just look up words because our kupuna were so brilliant. They had different descriptions for, they had one word to describe a kind of banana. That same word was used to describe a kind of limu that they would find in the ocean. That same word was to describe an ano of a person. And so I put up some of the descriptions of Makua. So Makua can mean a parent. It can mean somebody of a parent's generation, someone that's old enough to be a parent but may not have given birth. If you think about separating the word Makua, it means to place something on your shoulders, to carry something, to carry the burden of whatever that is. Care for your family, the knowledge that, that Kalani just shared. So to give you a little background about me, I wanted to first I'm not sure if we all know each other. Maybe you came with people that you knew. But I always start with mo'olelo. Mo'olelo, the word, if you look it up, has a bunch of these meanings. It talks about a succession of things, a succession of stories, a succession of plans, the connection and ridges of mountains that connect to each other. So mo'olelo, if you just think about it, some people will just kind of say, oh, mo'olelo is story. That's what it means, it's story. But really, mo'olelo talks about connection. Connection to place, connection to people, connection to practices. So I thought we should start off with a little bit of our own mo'olelo. What do you think? So my question for you is, what is a story that you carry with you? It can be something that you've seen or heard, something that you've experienced, a story that you've read or thought about, or a story that you've learned or sang. What is a story that you carry with you as you go throughout your day? You think about it. It influences your choices. And what is one thing that you've learned through that story? So take 5 seconds just to think about what that story might be for you. Okay. Is anybody brave enough to share with this room of strangers one thing that you learned? You don't need to tell about the story. What's one thing? Oh, yes, I need JJ. Come, you can do it on the mic or louder.
Oh, I'm JJ Barfield, and one story I learned, and I learned this from my mom, was always be nice to strangers, because you never know. I grew up on the Big Island, grew up in Kalapana, where our Madame Pele was, and we always had to respect her. So you never know, she could be a beautiful woman. Other gods could have been dogs. I mean, there were so many various stories and mo'olelos on that island. So if a stranger needed help or they came to your door, you always be respectful and treat them. And today I still do the same thing, and I pass that to my children. Always be nice to people.
Thank you.
That's my story.
Anybody else? One more person? Leona, I'm looking at you. But I don't mean to call you out, so you can say cancel.
For us, when we just shared, one thing that we always remembered with our friends just met was just family, like the stories of your family and your ohana just being with you wherever you are, even though they're not with you, but it's always been through the story.
Ooh, that's good. Can we clap for Leona? Did you notice that those stories were, one, about how we treat others in relationship, and two, about people who've influenced us through relationship? So, oh, I don't know what's happening. Something's ringing. Is that me? Oh, somebody's phone. Is this your phone? The truth about stories is that's really all we are. So there are 3 things that stories do. They're really cool. The first one is that they help us make sense of the world. They influence our identity. They help shape our relationships. They even impact how we think about power, our community, our own self-worth and value, and the work that we do. So first, stories, first and foremost, help us make sense of the world. Second, stories are collective memories. They allow us to pass on knowledge, like all of that knowledge that Kalani was dropping down, yeah? From one generation to the next, and that way it also helps us to hone skills based on that transmission of knowledge through relationships. The third thing that's super cool that stories do is that they have power. They have tangible power, they have suggestive power, and this is beyond just the content of what's being said. Because you've been in an audience before where somebody's telling a story and you're getting it on a whole nother level. But everybody else is like, oh, that's such a good story, it's so nice, but you understand the story with like 4 different layers of meaning. Do you know what I'm saying? So stories can carry that kind of power, they can carry that kind of message. There are certain stories that you tell only in certain situations, like when everybody's sad or something kind of hard is happening. Sometimes you tell stories for a purpose to create an arc of hope, to remind people of the greater pattern of movement of things that are happening beyond your own personal failure, your own personal mistake, or what have you, those kinds of things that happen. Stories are sometimes told to make political commentary. when the overthrow happened and the queen was enthroned, what was really interesting was that there was a story being written. It was a weekly submission in the newspapers, and it was storytelling of Hi'iaka. And at this particular moment, Hi'iaka moved from one place and magically appeared on Oahu in between two different stories, and she ended up fighting this huge, impenetrable monster of a force. How interesting, yes? A woman, regal, who has a purpose and a journey, and many people that support her, ends up fighting a formidable foe. And in the midst of this story that was told the day after the overthrow, the story basically said that Hi'iaka was hit down. It seemed like all hope was lost. But then you know what? She won. That was basically the story in a gist. What do you think that story was saying to the readers who were reading this in Hawaiian language, knowing that their queen was enthroned and knowing that the overthrow happened? It was to be a source of comfort, but it was also a political commentary that had power, tangible power. So in that way, stories inform how we make decisions, and it tells us how we're connected. So here's a bit about my personal story. I forgot that I wrote that about myself, so kind of a little bit of overlap. But I grew up in Mā'ili. This is my mom, and this is my grandma. My grandpa was a big influence in my life. His name was David Makali'iawang. And there are tons of memories that I remember of him. But the first was that he always played music, and we constantly had jam sessions. And if I could hide, I could stay up later than I was allowed to because my mom couldn't find me to send me to bed. And so I realized that he kind of was a force that collected people around him, and by being around each other, we learned about who we were, our collective identity. So I realized I follow in his footsteps in that way, and I'm influenced by that genealogy, that he tried to gather people, and I don't even know if he was like following in the footsteps of someone before that, of gathering people so that we can understand each other. It was a natural instinct to him. The second thing that I noticed about him was he was a masterful genealogist. He would go to Ala Moana, him and my grandma would sit in the middle of Makai Market, and all morning, it was like he had appointments all morning. People would come and sit down next to him and her and talk stories, and I have no idea who these people are, right? And he's like, okay, so this is related to this person who lives on this street, and remember when you were whatever 5 and this happened? That was that person. What? Okay. So I realized that my grandpa was a masterful genealogist. He knew about relationships to people, but he connected them to their relationship to land, and then he connected them to their relationship to stories. So that's one thing that I feel like I try to follow in his footsteps, to understand the connections between people, place, and our purpose. And one of the third things that I really admire about him is he kind of was a kipuka for people going through transition. So kipuka is like a safe place for regeneration. We have a okay-sized house, but any given moment, I felt like we could go from 8 people to 21 people in the house. That's because you just be like, okay, come over. Oh, whatever's happening, I don't care, come over. He'd pursue people, and it oftentimes would be in transitions where maybe CPS was involved, or maybe kind of like low income was involved, those kinds of things, but it didn't matter. And we'd all hang out together for better, I would have like 10 different new aunties and uncles that would be in the house. And the thing that I remember about that is he created a safe space for people to remember who they were and their kuleana. And so I feel like those are the spaces that I try to move in, because he set that kind of foundation for me. So as far as my educational pathway, it's a little interesting. I went to an all-girls school. It was a private school, but I grew up in Mā'ili, and my whole identity was wrapped up in my own, I love reading, and I love reading books, and I love being by myself. I was an introvert. I am an introvert. And when I went to school, I had a hard time. And I actually ended up flunking 3 of my classes because I went through depression, and I dropped out of school. And I also was on scholarships, so I had to figure out how to pay back $35,000-ish of scholarships. So the people that were my scholarship counselors, like Mickey is a scholarship counselor, were very generous and kind and said, okay, do slave labor for a summer and you don't have to pay $35,000. And if you were presented with that option, you would take it too, because I don't have $35,000 in my back pocket. So I did. I performed slave labor for Bishop Museum and 2 other organizations over that summer and tried to recover, but I was really shamed. In my family, some people expect you to be certain things. Do they do that to you in your family? Oh, that's the one that makes the good cookies. Oh, that's the one that is so good with the kids. Oh, that's the one that knows all the aunties and uncles, so if you can't remember and you're at a family outing, you go to that auntie or whatever, right? So in my family, one of the things that they call me is, oh, that's the brain. And not because they've ever seen me do anything smart or whatever. They're like, oh, you went private school, you're the brain. And you talk like you were raised in California or whatever. That's another reason. But but the real reason for that is my great grandma was mad. She wouldn't let us speak pidgin. And I don't know how everybody else grew up speaking pidgin except for me. But and so one of the things that I learned early on is that my grandpa, he didn't allow anybody else to come to the airport to see me. He was the only one there. And I just freaked out, and he goes, hey, it's okay, you're going back to school. I just came off of the plane after I flunked 3 of my classes and was potentially going to have to pay back $35,000 and lost all of my academic identity from being the brain after flunking out of school. And I was in depression. And that's what he said, no, you'll go back. And so he did. He helped me go back, and I fully intended on dropping out again. But I met a woman who changed my idea of school, my idea of education. And that woman, her name was Ai Ōpio Baker. She's my Hawaiian language teacher. She changed what education meant, and it wasn't about me doing good. It was about us taking care of each other. It was about us figuring out the things, the roles that we play in our community, and giving as much as we could to that purpose. And because she shifted what education meant to me, I was like, okay, I'll try again. You know, it's hard when you flunk 3 classes, and one of them was Introduction to Elementary Education, and the other one was Introduction to PE, Elementary. I flunked both of those classes. I also flunked Organic Chemistry, so if I'm like nervous and I don't want to share, I'll just say, oh yeah, I flunked Organic Chemistry, because a lot of people do that, but you know, not a lot of people can say that, but I'm proud of it. I'm so glad that I flunked. I'm really glad that I dropped out, and I'm really glad that I had to embrace that failure, because it actually led me on a path towards Hawaiian language. It led me on a path to understanding what education was and connected me to people that have changed my life. So if you're in a situation in between places where you're feeling like you're transitioning and you're like, I don't know what I'm going to become, and I hope it's a butterfly one day. You know, if you're in those places, it's a good place to be. And even those things that seem like they're really not blessings, they are. And so that's kind of a little bit about me. And on to Makua. Background about what a thesis is. Sometimes when I would think about my thesis, I'm like, oh gosh, it seems like this magician that's mysterious and I don't understand him. So I put him in the corner. There's a lot of words here, but I'll just pull out the main things. When you create a thesis, your teacher wants you to, okay, tell me what's the background, what's the context, the history. Okay, tell me what other people said about that so that I know that you actually read what I told you to read. That's called your literature review. And then, okay, based on all those things that you learned about the thing that you're interested in, tell me what are the gaps? What did people not research? And how are you going to fill in those gaps? So those are the steps that I went through. Then through filling out the gaps, you ask your question, you figure out how you're going to do it. That's your method. Then you kind of share your content, and then you answer your questions, hopefully. Usually you would think that it would go in order, but actually when you actually write it, it goes backwards. You start with, this is what I discovered because I'm so smart, and then you go back and be like, these are actually the questions that I had no idea that I was answering because you learn so much in the process. So that's just a background, because sometimes if you think about a thesis, what is that? Is that an encyclopedia that you're writing, or what is it? So that's basically it. It's a question, it's finding out what other people say about that question, and then it's trying to answer that question to the best of your ability. If I had to do it all over again, I would have completely done my thesis in a different way. I think it's important to have mentors, people who are willing to walk you through the process. And I found a lot of people that ended up being mentors, but it was after I had started a long time ago and I didn't want to go back and start all over again. So if you need a mentor, I'm willing to help. You walk through the process. But my Makua Valley is, what I looked at, is actually not one valley, it's three. There are three names, Ohikilolo, Kahanahaiki, and Makua, but for the purposes of shortness, I'll just call it Makua. But know that is not the only name nor the only valley. And I looked at stages of work that was done between September 1998 and September 2006. I looked at it through the media, I looked at it through interviews, and I wanted to know, how do you create change? How do you create change from crappy situations? How do you bring back land to what its purpose was? How do you do these things? And that's how I set off. And that's why it was important for me. So I started with this, ʻāina. What is ʻāina? It's that which feeds. So the idea is, who feeds you when you're little? That which feeds is a makua, or grandparents, or whoever happens to have the food around you. ʻāina carries you. When you're fed, it carries you. It provides you with purpose. Ooh, it tastes ono, you want to go after. It gives you an understanding of, ooh, I want to do this some more because it's making me feel good. I have good muscles, I have strong eyesight, or whatever. It feeds you. And because it's more than just a resource that satisfies our own needs, it's more than a transaction of I give you $5 and you give me something in exchange. It's a family. It's a familial kind of relationship that we share with ʻāina as our foundation. ʻāina carries our memories in its landscape. If you look at the ridges and the way that we've covered over things with concrete, it's hard to see the stories if it's underneath 5 feet of concrete. But it actually carries those things and reveals it over time, and the practices are how we maintain relationship with ʻāina. So you don't always have a perfect relationship with your mom, do you? Or you don't always have a perfect relationship with your siblings or your kids. They change, yeah? So what would happen if you don't call your mom for 10 years? You would have an estranged relationship. It would be like, oh, I don't really know who that is anymore because I haven't talked to them for 10 years. And the same thing is with ʻāina. The more we spend time paying attention to how the sun sets or how the moon rises or the different phases of the moon or the different things that we can plant, the ʻāina begins to talk to you and you begin to notice things because you're developing in a relationship. And so this is the foundation, I think the foundation from which Fred and many of the wonderful people that I interviewed come from. Just a quick overview of Makua history. It is the setting of Hawaiian creation mythology. There are over 45 rare and endangered species there. There are over 100 identified archaeological sites in Makua itself. And it's a base for cultural practice. Do you see these dates? Can you even read them? No? Yes? Okay. I want to call attention to 1941. What happened around then? Military took it. Yeah, so that was World War II. At that time, 6,600 acres were seized in Makua, and the entire island of Kaho'olawe, which is 28,800 acres of land, was seized. The territorial governor said, no, let's set some limitations, like you're gonna give it back, right? And of course, the federal government said, don't worry, we got it, beef curry, right? And that went on, and when the war ended, the territorial governor wrote to them and said, all right, time's up. 6 months after the war, time to give it back. And it didn't happen. And they said, well, we kind of like it, and we'll just use it. We're used to using it. It's a nice place to use so much land. And then in this kind of situation of kind of illegal seizure of land and maintenance of land continued until 1964, when President Johnson issued an executive order that basically said, oh, okay, this is ours. And the federal government actually stated the terms under which it was going to become theirs. And the terms were that, okay, we're going to give you a 65-year lease. We're going to give generously 2,400 of the beachside access back to the state so you guys can have something. We'll retain 4,600 acres for ourselves, and we'll pay you $1 for 65 years. Do you believe that? It doesn't seem like it's real. I feel like I just made that up, but that's actually what happened. And this lease expires 2029, which is coming up. Fred, fix anything if I miss something or whatever. So some of the histories in the 1970s, there was a Hawaiian cultural renaissance that happened. Without going too much into it, although it's really fascinating and wonderful time, it was when a lot of folks in Hawaii experienced this heightened consciousness and awareness of, we need to return to ʻāina, we need to return to our practices. And they started off with actually fighting off land grabs. And these are some of them. Kalama Valley, who knows where Kalama Valley is? Hawaii Kai. Kaho'olawe, they started landing on Kaho'olawe. This is where the George Helm, and out of these kinds of stances and trying to reconnect with ʻāina, that's the genealogy of how folks began connected to Makua. It actually, Makua began at the same time, the resistance or the struggle to return Makua occurred around the same time as Kaho'olawe, when Kaho'olawe started. This is a lot of things. Remember I said you had to prove to your professor that you actually read the things that they told you to read? So this is how I convinced them. But you don't need to read all of this. I'll tell you what it says. Basically it says, okay, there are some theories that say this is how people create social change. There are some theories that say, okay, law is good and these are the kinds of strategies that we can use to get back land. These are the kinds of strategies that we can use to kind of wrestle with the federal government, and these are successful ways that we've received land back from the federal government. And so those are the literature things that I looked at. And then I said, oh, I found some gaps, because that's what you're supposed to do when you go to UH. And so some of the gaps that I found, I asked questions about. The 3 questions I asked are, okay, well, what's the difference between what people actually say about their experience, their narratives, their stories, and what's actually in the media? That was my first question. My second question was, okay, so the legal strategy came in around in 1998. So what did that do? Did it do anything? Did it help? Did it not help? Should we consider this for future movements or not so much, or consider it in certain kinds of ways? Remember, because my thing is, how do we create social change? And then the third is, oh, in the midst of this, 9/11 happened. It's called an exogenous shock if you're a sociology major, but really that just means all hell breaks loose. Everything that you counted on is not there anymore. Exogenous shock, something that upsets the equilibrium of the system and actually creates a window of opportunity for change to happen. So what happened? Did 9/11 actually create a window of opportunity for folks like Fred Dodge to create change? Oh, this is really, really small. This is what I actually did to look at the research. So I collected interviews. I interviewed folks. I did 9 interviews. And then I collected 4 newspapers from 1998 till 2006, which is about 383 articles. I coded all of those articles, which just meant that I read all of them. And then I had to discover, what are the stories that are being told? I had to mine it for the stories and then create like a manual, like A means this and B means this. So anytime somebody said something like this, I coded it in a certain way. And so it's a practice called content analysis, when you immerse yourself in reading so much stories and then you try to code them so you can see a pattern, whose stories are being shared. That's helpful to find out who is saying what, and what are they saying? So I had 18 appeal types, and they were just, I'll focus on 3 of them. One is, okay, the military protects and maintains cultural stewardship practices. It actually allows it. That's one kind of claim. And then the opposing claim was, they don't, right? Easy. Another one is, the military is a very responsible advocate for environmental stewardship. And then the opposite was, they don't. See, it's not that hard. Everybody can do something like this. It just takes a lot of time. I became best friends with people at the, so there are indexes. Some newspapers, like, I can't even think of a newspaper, Star Bulletin. This is when Honolulu Advertiser and Star Bulletin were 2 separate newspapers. They actually have an index, so you can type in Makua and it'll say, oh, bam, there are 800 articles about Makua. Which one would you like first, right? Then 2 of the newspapers that I used do not have indexes, which meant I became best friends with the people in those offices because I was there every single day Xeroxing and looking through every single article that was written between 1998 and 2006. So if you wanted to do something like this, I can tell you a million different ways to do it in a more easier way. The story has to do with a lot of actors. I'm not going to explain all of them, but the main actors that were involved in the legal cases were Earth Justice and Malama Makua. Initially in 1998, the court cases focused on these things. I'm going to go over a lot of acronyms, and I'm so sorry if they become confusing. I can't help it. That's what the research talks about. So first, the court case tried to actually get the federal government or the military to do what they said they're supposed to do, to comply with the Endangered Species Act, or ESA. It also tried to cease live fire and get the military to commit to a completion of an environmental impact statement, which is required under NEPA. Federal government agencies have to do these things. It's mandatory, but yet they had trains and never done any of these. And then they were trying to compel the Army to think about environmental stewardship by using the environmental impact statement for all future decisions for the betterment of the ʻāina. So there are 2 main claims that I pulled out of the newspaper. The first is Malama Makua's claims. There were 2. One is, hey, there are alternatives to Makua, so don't train here. And then the second one was training is inappropriate because it has an impact, a negative impact on the community, the environment, and cultural practice. So those are their 2 claims, the main claims. The Army is kind of the opposite. Oh, there's really no alternative to Makua, is theirs. And we can totally do cultural and environmental care and train at the same time. So those are the kind of claims that were there. A quick overview of, how am I doing on time? How's everybody doing? Is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay, not getting bogged down? Okay, good. An overview of the Endangered Species Act basically says, hey, if you're a federal agency and you're going to impact an endangered species, you'd better work with the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife Services to assess what you're doing, how you're impacting the environment. And you have to get something called a jeopardy ruling from them. Jeopardy ruling says what you're doing is good, keep on going, or what you're doing is bad and you need to adjust or stop what you're doing altogether. Those are jeopardy ruling, got it? Okay. To give you an overview of endangered species, nationally there are about 1,000. Hawaii has 32% of endangered species. Considering our land mass, that's amazing. Makua has 12% of endangered species of all the Hawaiian Islands. Just to give you a scope, idea of scope. Okay, under NEPA, NEPA just says, hey, if you're gonna impact humans, then you have to do an EIS, which is an environmental impact statement. But if you're not sure, if you're like, oh, maybe I impact the human environment, but maybe I don't, I'm not really sure. Federal agencies can also choose to do something that costs less and takes less time. And that is called an EA, or an environmental assessment. Okay, EIS, way more money, way more time. EA, oh, you're not sure if you're gonna do an EIS, so you just do that. It's short, yeah? At the end of an EA, you have one of two options. Either, yeah, we gotta do the EIS because I think we impact the human environment, or, oh, now we're good, we don't need to. If it's a we're good, we don't need to do anything else after this, it's called a FONSI. Not the character from Happy Days. A FONSI is a finding of no significant impact. That's what FONSI is, okay? So many words. So the first thing that I found, very interesting. Before the court case, Makua was not in the media at all and had no attention, very little to no attention from government officials. Between 1998 and 1999, these are the two stories that emerged. The first, in the media, the Army is highlighted as, okay, they caused an 800-acre fire. They felt really bad about it, so they did a voluntary ceasefire. Because they cared about the community, they were heroes, and they really had a proactive response by stopping their training. They wanted to demonstrate a legacy of environmental care, not scare, and they were very generous to the cultural sensitivity of the area. This is the story that's portrayed in the media. This is the story that's portrayed in interviews from Malama Makua members, like Fred, and Earth Justice. There are over 207 documented fires before that one that caused 800 acres to go ablaze. They wanted to include the voice of the community in the decisions that were being made in Makua, and they were being ignored. And they had already delivered an intent to sue before that fire happened. Different story, totally different story, right? So theirs was a proactive response to an ongoing injustice, not just, oh wait, 800-acre fire, poor thing, 207 fires, poor thing, yeah? And they had patience in developing a legal strategy as their tool for change. They wanted the military to have meaningful interactions with them about what they were doing and how it impacted the community's health. So between 2000 and 2001, the legal strategy began to do three things. The first is more people knew about it, because the second thing is it became available in media stories in the newspapers. And the third is it actually activated political elite, so basically government officials' involvement in speaking about Makua. During this time, the Army gets into a bit of trouble. The Army decides, oh, we're not sure if we have any impact on the human environment, so we're gonna do an EA. Remember the cheaper, faster one? They submit 4 drafts of an EA, and then at the end decide, oh, we have a finding of no significant impact. But they had already said in the EA, oh yeah, we dispose napalm bombs, mustard gas, hazardous waste, lead, mercury, arsenic. But we have no impact on the human environment or the community around us, which is problematic if you say that because it seems like you're lying. The jeopardy ruling, remember they had to, under the ESA, Endangered Species Act, get the jeopardy ruling. The jeopardy ruling said, the impact on the environment cannot be eliminated or minimized to insignificant levels. Cannot. In the 4th version of the EA, the final one that they submitted, the EA actually, the Army hid the jeopardy ruling so that nobody saw it. And then they said, FONSI. And the Army also tried to dismiss the lawsuit. But the judge, her name was Judge Malway, she supported Malama's claim and let the lawsuit go forward. Okay, so this is a collection of all of the newspapers from 1998 to 2006, 383 of them. These are the 4 newspapers that I collected: Star Bulletin, Advertiser, Hawaii Army Weekly, and Honolulu Weekly. So that's just an overview. By far, the majority of the articles came from Honolulu Advertiser, 226 articles from the Advertiser. And the least amount of articles obviously came from Honolulu Weekly because they only provide articles once weekly. Oh gosh, okay, so remember all those appeals? I said, oh, the Army does a good job or not. So these are all the appeals that I coded in those 383 articles. And I I need my notes for this so I can say it succinctly. Hold on. Oh gosh, I'm far along here. How are we doing? Okay. Okay, there are 18 claims from here to here. There are 10 claims makers. That just is people that make claims. Out of 2,164 appeals that were made between that time period, 41.8, so 42% of those were made by, guess who? The Army. That means that of all of those, it's almost a 2-to-1 ratio of what the Army says in the media versus any other speaker. There are 10 people that could have made claims. Some of them include Earth Justice. Some of them include Malama Makua. Some of them are government officials. Some of them are miscellaneous unidentified community members. But out of those, by far, the people that were given standing in the media, 42% of all of those claims over that time was from the Army. Interesting, yeah? Yep. Highlighted on the far right, although you can't see it, were the most highly debated appeals, and there were 2 of them. The first was either the military does a good job of environmental stewardship or not, and the second is there are alternatives to Makua or there are not. Interesting, because those 2 appeals that occurred most often in the newspapers were those from the legal cases. Does that make sense? Yeah? That was what they talked about in the legal case, so that's what appeared in the claims. All of the other kinds of claims, they kind of get thrown on the side. Yeah, you cannot see them as much. So 56% of the news coverage for this period of time, or that 1998 to 2006, 56% is all about the court case, yeah? Law, what they did regarding the law. This year gets confusing because this is when 9/11 comes in. Remember exogenous shock, everything breaks loose. So the exogenous shock actually supports training, right? Because if you get attacked, then more people want to support training. It reduced the media coverage about Makua, but it created a window of opportunity, and the window of opportunity was this, that members of Malama Makua and Earth Justice entered into an agreement called the October 4th Settlement, where they did all of these wonderful things, which right now just looks like words, but I'm gonna highlight a few of them because they're groundbreaking. And the reason why they were able to do this is because they understood their genealogy. They looked at what happened at Kaho'olawe, with Kaho'olawe, and they made changes in strategy based on what they learned there. They also, because they had such strong relationships of being invested in community change and caring about what happened, they thought through every single individual aspect of how training could impact us. And they served as bulldogs for this purpose. They did a really great job. So one of the first things is, okay, they allowed live fire training. They said the military has to create an EIS in 3 years, or guess what, no training at all after that. And they got the military to agree to that, the Army. They ordered additional studies, so on the limu, on cultural and archaeological sites, because they wanted to know what is the cultural impact of the things that are happening at Makua. These kinds of studies could not be ordered through a legal court case. This was a special case where they could ask for these special things outside of court. I think another really great thing is that they mandated the ability for Hawaiian language to be presented as a form of claims making. Short story about Hawaiian language. While it's official language of our state, you can't, if you provide testimony in Hawaiian for anything, what happens is they don't record what you say, nor do they translate it. So virtually it becomes like you said nothing, which is something that we need to change. And so this is something that they started. They set a precedent in the state of Hawaii for if somebody made their testimony in Hawaiian language, they had to record it, they had to translate it, and they had to include it in their reports. That's huge. And another unprecedented thing is, this is a live military training site, but they watched what happened at Kaho'olawe. The federal government said, oh, we'll clean it, everything's gonna be okay, we're gonna, do whatever we're gonna do, and then when we're done, then we'll clean it. Did it get clean? No. Okay, so this is what they did. They said, guess what? You are training now, and you will clean now. And so they've mandated that continual unexploded ordnance cleanup. These are all of these strides that they made because of relationships, because of the stories that they shared, and because of what they learned through their relationships with people in Kaho'olawe and other social change. That's 5 more minutes. Okay, 5 more minutes, guys, hang in there. Okay, so from 2002 to 2006, a very interesting thing happened. Remember, 9/11 happened, they signed the settlement, and what you do and what you say is two different things, yeah? Sometimes you tell your kids, do what I say, not what I do. Okay, so that actually makes a difference in organizations as well. Remember, Malama's claims were alternatives to Makua are available and training is inappropriate. So Malama folks had a bit of frame conflict because from 2002 to 2004, according to the settlement, even though they thought training was inappropriate, they agreed to permit it. Yeah, that was their frame conflict. This is the frame conflict for the military. They said there's no alternatives to Makua, we can't train anywhere else, and we can do the cultural environmental stewardship and training at the same time really, really well. So between 2002 and 2006, the Army, through the Department of Defense, then tried to get wholesale exemptions to their environmental responsibilities. They tried to throw out, oh, we don't want to have to follow the Endangered Species Act or NEPA. And so they tried to get around having to follow through with their duties by doing this. That seems like a conflict of interest. Yeah, if you say, we can do environmental stewardship really well, and then you try to not have to do it at all. The second thing is they ended up igniting a fire that burned 2,500 acres of the 4,200 acres, and it actually entered into critical habitat and then killed some of the populations and impacted 71 endangered plants. After the fire, then they tried to bypass environmental procedures so that they could return to training. They missed the Makua EIS deadline. Remember, they said you had to do it or what? You cannot train. So they missed the deadline. They completed an incomplete version 1 year later, and then they also tried to bypass the settlement to continue training. Is there a lot of alignment between what they're saying and what they're doing? No. So things got hard for them because the judge again, Judge Malway, said, due to your lack of compliance with that settlement that you agreed in, you cannot train. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. So in conclusion, there are three. There are stories that are available in the media, and there's stories that are available in the interviews. The stories that are available in the interviews do not show up in the media. They're full of relationships, they're full of cultural understanding, and those things do not get represented because who's represented in the media? The military. 42% of everything that was printed was what the military said about their environmental stewardship or what they were doing. But the good thing about the media is the military had 42% of their claims, and then they didn't follow through with what they said they were going to do. So in the long term, if you're patient and you believe in the trajectory of hope, and you're optimistic even though things are hard, there is light at the end of the tunnel, yeah? Another conclusion, what did the legal strategy do at Makua? Well, it actually reconstructed the landscape for this social change in this particular area, yeah? It increased the visibility of Makua and the Makua struggle in the media. It expanded the idea of environmental struggle to include community health and cultural health, and that's huge. And then it also provoked or encouraged attention from government officials because of the big conflict between what was being said and what was being done. And lastly, my last question, okay, so what? 9/11, when we have windows of opportunity, how can we use those windows of opportunity for our benefits? So 9/11 is what actually exposed the Army's contradictions in what they said they would do and what they actually did. And even though the October 4th settlement exposed frame conflict for Malama Makua members, by far and large, the Army was the one that was revealed to be a little bit not forthwith of what they, not following through with what they said they would do. So what now? The 65-year lease expires in 2029. There are plans for Makua, because they've completely eroded their argument that there are no alternatives to Makua because they've had to use alternatives. It has not been used since 2004. It's a long time to say you have to use a place, but then you haven't had access to it. Was that 13 years, or don't do math fast really well? But if you would like to go on a cultural access visit to Makua Valley, there are handouts that were given out at the front, and you can sign up if you would like to be more involved with Malama Makua. There's also a Facebook page called Haumana, which will give you updates not only about Makua, but related activities. I wanted to once again thank everyone who was involved, Mā'ili, Fred, for all of their ike, their knowledge, their persistence, their love of land, and their love for people. As well as, these are some of my kupuna and my mom and brother. And these are the two teachers that kind of kept me in school. And so I wanted to thank them. Thanks everyone for listening. Did I go over? I know we did.
Does anyone have any questions or just all comments that you'd like to share regarding Ileana's presentation? Oh, no.
Yes.
So all that started off of your one question that you began with, like all that research came off of that question.
That one question. I didn't even have those questions. To be honest, those 3 questions were not my questions. Mine was like, what's happening at Makua and why don't people talk about it? I don't know anything about it. And that's what the question came from. And then as I began to learn more, then I went backwards and created the questions that I found the answers to. But yeah. Yeah.
You said you listened to testimony or stories. Did you hear the ones that were only verbal, audio?
So the question was, did I listen to the testimonies? I actually have the reports, the EIS reports, and some of the draft supplemental EAs. And in those, they actually write up. So I didn't get to listen because I don't know how to get those. I didn't know you could get those. But yeah, I read through those, and then I interviewed folks who had been involved in those processes.
How do you find those? I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Back in 2006 or 2005, I think.
Unfortunately, those kinds of documents, if you're not grabbing them when they're available online, I have an electronic copy. So if you'd want them, I can just send it over to you. And you have my contact information, so if you email me or call me, I can send it to you. So I have them because I was studying them. But some of them, if you don't grab them, they're not indexed.
They're on EIS.
What would it be in their EIS?
Yeah, no.
Oh yeah, the testimonies are.
Oh, they are?
They're a part of the environmental impact statement. Community voice is necessarily included in there, and all of it is printed up, yeah? Yeah.
I'm thinking that some of the EISs are archived in the OETC website,
But not these. I've looked for them.
But not these are not.
Yeah, I don't know why they're not.
Which is interesting why the military
yeah.
EISs are not stored there.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I was able to just find them, and it was because I kept on bothering people. I actually was unable to interview a lot of folks from the military. That was like a 3 to 6 month process where I tried to get people to talk to me, but because the court case was active, but being present in those offices, they just started giving me the copies. And I was like, hey, thanks, great. Where can I get these online? And they said, oh, no, just take these. So I have the CDs if you want to. You can have them. It's a whole lot.
I think we have.
Yeah. Anybody else?
So where does this research get published? How does the word get out about all these wonderful things that you learn?
So I actually, I went to UH Press and they said, here, add 300 more pages and we'll publish it. And I said, oh, maybe not. So I'm actually going to be giving a copy here to Paula folks. So if you would like a copy, you can access it. If you email me, I'm happy to email you a copy if you want to talk about it. Actually, Laurel and I, she's also writing and studying social movements. So we'll be talking this week. Anybody else? Yes.
I'm just curious what else, I'm curious about September 11th and what you were talking about, so I'm just curious if there was other connections that had happened or other things, or I'm wondering, like, specifically if soldiers in the Army came here for training and then went to Iraq, or if there's anything else that came out, I don't know.
Okay, for 9/11,
Yeah.
this is on the thesis, so I'm a bit rusty about it right now, but they were able to, they immediately started training October 4th, right? So yes, they were coming here and, oh, Fred, do you want to take this conversation? Yeah, he can.
It's been excellent, excellent. But yeah, what happened when 9/11 happened is that
I don't, can I get it to you? Sorry, I don't want to.
yeah, this is a bit about how Lama Makua had a number of board members. And what one lawyer in particular, Earth Justice David Henkin, who is very good, he's a terrific guy. He researched it and said, when there's a national emergency, and there was at 9/11, the Army can ignore all the environmental laws, all the protection of endangered species, because national emergency, we gotta, save the nation or whatever it is. And so they could have just ignored all the work that you looked up and that we had tried to do, and they could have started training. So we had a decision to make in Makua. It was the most difficult decision we've ever made, because one of our basic things that we wanted to do was to stop training and therefore the damage that training does. And now, because the Army could train no matter what we did, the laws of the country are such that in a national emergency, they could train. So we decided to negotiate. And we knew, and what actually happened too, was that one of the negotiation points that the Army would insist on is that they could train. But the negotiations also said, how much can you train? Before 1998, they could just about train every day of the year if they wanted to. And they often trained many days of that year. But we were able to get them to limit their training. And so they were given about, again, I'm gonna shed my paper, but that's all right. They were given about 12 trainings a year. It was a little more irregular than that, like there was 15 one year, 9 another year, and so on. But they ended up, out of the 36 that they could have done, they ended up doing only 27. One of the reasons for that was that they had to minimize the risk of fire. Like you say, over 200 fires in less than a 10-year period, and that does enormous damage. And not just to endangered species and the plants and the tree snails and so on, but it also harms the cultural sites, the archaeological sites. They get burns, rocks break open. There's a lot of stuff that happens. So basically they had to have a very strong fire plan. If conditions weren't right, and if the conditions were right for training, that would be a green. They actually had a thing out there, I don't know if you guys have seen it. There was green, and then there was caution yellow. And it was, hey, it's the middle of summer, we haven't had rain in a while, things are really dry, then it's red. You know. So they had by these rules to limit their training. And this helped. This helped because, like Ili said, there was only one major fire. I think it was in 2003 that burned over 2,000 acres. It was very damaging. But in any case, we had to decide that. And by the way, Karen just said, do you remember that long into the early hours of the morning? And we had to thrash it out and so on. Were we going to allow training of any amount? And we decided to do that. And that was very divisive to our board. We lost one member because he wasn't going to allow anything. It wasn't going to stay on the board if you allowed anything. But the rule we finally used was, what is best for Makua, this sacred land? What's best? What's best for the land, for the valley? And we felt that what we would get in exchange for allowing limited training was worth it. And one of the things we have is to be able to have these accesses into the valley, these cultural accesses, twice a month, plus 2 overnighters for the makahiki, opening and closing. And that they would have to have this severe, this very strict fire plan. And that the other thing that they voluntarily decide to give up, which is great, that they wouldn't use tracers. Tracers, set a lot of fires. They wouldn't use rockets. So we felt in the end, or during this discussion, that what's best for the valley is to allow limited training and get all these other things. And there were 10 items that we got out of this thing. But I think the cultural access, to get people to see the valley, to walk in it, these beautiful stone structures, these beautiful cultural archaeological sites, that was the best argument, the best way to get the public in our favor. And I think that's been shown. That's been shown. Public opinion has changed. So we went along with it. And Malama Makua has survived, but I tell you, it was a tough thing. That settlement agreement was one of the most difficult things I have personally ever been involved with, and I think every member of Malama Makua would say the same thing. But they started training in October, 9/11, obviously September 11th, and we had meeting after meeting, often nights after nights, and finally we were able to negotiate through our lawyers and through the Army's lawyers and so on, that these things would happen. Limited training, but we would get cultural accesses. There was some money that the Army provided for evaluating the environmental impact statement that they had to do. That was a biggie. They really wanted us to do that. And would you believe, as a postscript, I'm sorry taking some time. They have put the environmental impact statement out. But we said, no, this was not a good statement, and the judge agreed with us. And they haven't as yet completed the environmental impact statement. Not to our satisfaction anyway, and not to the judges. And I think Judge Mulway has been very fair. And she wasn't always expected to do that. She was a Dan Inouye appointee. And Dan, as you know, is, I don't want to speak the ill of those who have passed away, but he's always been a hawk, and his own military experience, led him to that position. So I think if I had been in World War II and lost an arm, I might have the same position. But he was a hawk, and everybody expected that Judge Mulway would not be as fair as she turned out to be. I'm talking too much, pardon me. But anyway, thank you very much. That was a very good presentation.
Mahalo nui nā Dr. Dodge, and mahalo for sharing the story. If I can just talk about, for me, the experience this evening and the importance of mo'olelo, the importance and the richness of the stories that we have, and how important it is to share it. Because if we do not share it, we do not know who we are, and if we do not share it, we cannot make the changes in the world like they made. And I would really, really like to mahalo Kalani and Ile this evening, because it's always hardest to be the first ones up here. But I do not have the privilege of being from this coast, from being from the Wai'anae Coast. But I just want to share really short. I know it's getting late. But driving out over here is such a godly experience. I come around that coast, go down the hill, and I just breathe it in, and it's And for myself, I have the privilege of working with the graduate students with the Naho Kamapauahi Scholarship. And I tell you this straight out and honestly, some of the most brilliant, sharpest, most passionate people come from this coast. And they are giving their time, love, energy, and a lot of money to really give back. Because they know that they have to be able to share their story, share the story of the ancestors, of their family, of their kupuna. They have to be able to share it in a way that the world can hear, that the government will hear, that the militaries will hear. And that's something that, that is not easy to do, because you have family to take care of, you have other responsibilities, but that is a sacrifice that they have chosen to make. And I think we are so proud and so glad to finally have this opportunity to share some of their mana'o with the community. And so mahalo nui once again for taking the time, your precious time, to be here to support them, but also to hear what they have to share, because this is so important and so valuable. And I think, if I may speak for Paula Ann, this is her baby, this project. And I think there was a question of how do we share these stories? What do we do? Where do we take them? How are we going to share it all? Well, hopefully, we're trying to make this one place. And this is just day one. This is just the first one. We're going to have another one on March 11th. And, if you felt that this was a good experience, please share with others. And please bring them next time. Because next time we actually have our two speakers who will be presenting for us and with us here in the room. Leona Watson and Kalua. And Kalua Cruz. And so I know, because I had the privilege of kind of jumping into this project midway. I have this huge list of people who are from the Wai'anae Coast who are doing all kinds of projects who want to share. This is just the beginning. We're hoping that it goes every month, go next year, keep on going until we have this huge repository of all the wealth of mana'o from the Wai'anae Coast. So mahalo once again for being here on a very special day, just the first day of very special. Going to lead us in Oli and
And on behalf of Moku'o Wai'anae, our community, our Kaiāulu, we are so very, very proud of both of you. And I'm speaking on behalf of everybody in this room, I'm sure. We just want to brag about how brilliant our young people are, and even our older people too. And I think this is how we do it. So all of you in this room, go out and brag to all your neighbors about how smart we are and how rich our community is with great minds. And let's make that be the conversations that people have about Wai'anae going forward. So if you would all please stand with me, and we're going to do uhola, our oli mahalo. We put the words over there in the front in case you don't know it. Just to mahalo our presenters tonight and give thanks for our Lord's presence with us in this room and for all the fellowship tonight and the good talking that we had and the potential that it has to just make our community a more better place to live. So, uhola ia ka makaloala, kuai ke alohala, kukai ia ka haloala, hale mai na lehua, mai ka ho'ohui a ka haila maila, mahalo